Hello, this is the Xtar VC8S battery charger. Now obviously it's an 8-cell charger and it can charge lithium ion and nickel metal hydride. But actually, and I'll just peel this display sticker off, it's a bit cleverer than that because it can charge lithium iron phosphate and it can also mostly charge sodium ion. Now it can charge up to 2 cells at 3 amps. So let's put 2 cells in here and see if we get 3 amps. So a couple of these Xtar 21700s, and there's a brief pause, and yep, the left hand one is charging at 3 amps and the right hand one is charging at 3 amps. Now this up to 2 cells charging at 3 amps each is a fairly strict rule. If I pop one additional nickel metal hydride in here, then as soon as it recognizes the nickel metal hydride, you can see it immediately drops the two 21700s down to 2 amps. And that's because there's a rule. You can only charge 2 cells at up to 3 amps. And if I remove the nickel metal hydride, you can see that these 2 cells immediately go back to 3 amp charging. Let's take a look at what the mode button does. If I press it, firstly it brightens up the display, then it changes from current display to capacity display. So you can see that it's showing 202 milliamp hours. That's what it's put into that cell so far. And of course I can do the same with the right hand display, switch it to capacity 216 milliamp hours, and if I press again we can look at the internal resistance IR. So if I press this one I can get the internal resistance of both of these cells. Now if I press the current button it will show me what the current is, if you like. So currently it's set to 3 amps. Now that is a maximum current. It doesn't always charge at 3 amps because of these rules. Up to 2 cells at 3 amps, up to 4 cells at 2 amps, and up to 8 cells at 1 amp. So the choices for current are 3 amps, 2 amps, 1 amp, half an amp, and quarter of an amp, and then back to 3 amps. Now most of the time you might as well leave it set to 3 amps because the charger intelligently chooses a current based on a number of factors. So let's switch these back to showing the current, switch the light on and switch it back to current. You can see both of those are charging at 3 amps. Okay, let's pop in another couple of cells. These are 18650s. Let's put one in there and one in there, and we'll see what current those charge at. So after a brief test period, okay, so the left hand cell is charging at half an amp and this cell is charging at half an amp. Now the rules of course say that you can have up to 4 cells charging at 2 amps each, but there are other factors like how much power is available at the input connector, and this is a USB Type-C, but also the internal resistance. So let's take a look at the internal resistance of these 4 cells. I'll switch it to IR on both sides of the charger. And you can see that these 2 are quite low at 20 and 17. These 2 are higher at 88 and 85 milliohms. Now, when I discovered that this battery charger chooses a different current depending on internal resistance, well, I was keen to know what the thresholds are for the changes, and it's not documented, so I had to work it out for myself. So I wrote down a whole series of internal resistances and current settings. So I'm quite happy with the 2 amps that these 2 cells are charging at. That is the maximum if you've got 4 cells. But these 2 18650s at half an amp is a bit slow. So what can I do? Well, if I disconnect them briefly and then press on the sliders so that I'm imparting a bit more pressure between the contacts and the cell, you can see that I've now managed to get them to charge at 1 amp And if we take a look at the internal resistances, you'll see why. This one is 78 milliohms, this one is 62 milliohms. And if I look at my chart, 78 and 62 are both in this section, which gives rise to a 1 amp charge current. And you can see that the charge currents, well, you can't at the moment because I'll switch back to current. You can see that the charge currents for these two cells are 1 amp, and we've still got 2 amps going into the 21700s. Now I've got this battery charger plugged into a portable power station, and you can see that it's negotiated 15 volts on the USB Type-C, and it's currently pulling 24 watts. Okay, let's once again break the up to 4 cells at 2 amps rule by putting in this nickel metal hydride. And you can see that immediately that it detects that cell. The maximum current in the other batteries is now 1 amp. Right, let's populate the battery charger with all 8 cells. So we'll stick a couple of these in here, and that one, and that one, and we'll see what we get in terms of currents. Well, now, of course, some of these are full or very nearly full. This one's at 4.2 volts, but this one's at 3.9 volts, and we're only getting 250 milliamps. So once again, let's try pressing the contacts closed and see whether on this channel we can get more than 250 milliamps. No, why is that? And it's because the internal resistance of that cell is high at 132 milliohms. Right, let's try the other modes. So press and hold the mode button and it switches to grade. Now what grade does is it charges the cells fully, then discharges them and measures their capacity, and then charges them fully again. Let's press and hold and switch this one to grade. So you can see in this mode, the cells that are charging say CHG, and the cells that are discharging show you the capacity in milliamp hours. Now, if you briefly press the mode button, we can switch to a milliohms reading, internal resistance reading. Doesn't stay on the display for very long. And if we press it again, we can look at the current, and you'll see that the discharging cell has a fixed discharge current of 300 milliamps. So it's a fairly slow discharge process, and that's because there are no fans in this unit and it's just discharging into resistors. So the full cycle of charge, discharge, and then recharge again could take quite a long time, could take possibly more than a day, and on the basis that you really shouldn't charge lithium-ion cells while you're asleep, you may want to do that in several stages. Charge the cells fully first, and then perhaps the next day do the discharge and capacity measurement, and then charge the cells fully up on a different day. Right, let's take a look at the other mode. If I press and hold the mode button, it switches to store. Let's press and hold the mode button on this half of the unit. It switches to store. Now what it will do now is, well, these cells are all fairly high voltage, so it will discharge them all. You can see discharge here down to the storage voltage, and very sensibly they've chosen a storage voltage of 3.65 volts if it's charging them up, or 3.60 volts if it's discharging them. So all these cells will now discharge to 3.60 volts. Now, because when it's in the storage mode it charges cells up to 3.65 volts, this means you can charge lithium iron phosphate. Now, the only lithium iron phosphate cells I've got are these little AA size cells, but I can pop these in now, making sure that it's in storage mode. I know that it's not going to charge these beyond 3.65 volts. And it does a full constant current, constant voltage charge. So it does charge these properly and fully. And if we look at the animations here, you can see that a charging cell has an incrementing segment, a discharging cell has decrementing segments, And a cell that has completed the storage charge shows 2 of the 4 segments lit, indicating that it's at a sort of half voltage. And because in storage mode this charges to 3.65 volts, you can actually mostly charge sodium ions. So these are sodium ion cells. Now these are actually 26 650s. You'll notice that the 2 outer slots are slightly wider and I think designed to take 26 650s. So let's pop these sodium ion cells in these outer 2 bays, but actually you can also fit them in other bays. Let's put one there, for example. And I know now that in storage mode, these cells, which are sodium ion and shouldn't be charged to more than about 4 volts, will charge up to 3.65 volts. In fact, you can see I've already charged these 4 cells up to 3.65 volts. And this is useful because although they're not fully charged, they are now all balanced. They're all charged to the same voltage. So that will be useful when I'm building battery packs. And I also wanted to show that if you've got 26 650s in here, you can actually still fit 18 650s in between them, like so. So you can mix 26 650s and 18 650s and they will physically fit. Now the length of these bays will take 21 700s, and in fact you can see it's 8.41. Now I haven't slid the slider back because it's quite hard to do. So if we take off the 0.41, then I think you can see that you can probably fit unprotected cells up to 8 centimeters or 80 millimeters in length. Okay, now on to nickel metal hydride. So I'll put a couple of these Xtar nickel metal hydrides into the unit. I'm also going to put a couple of IKEA ladder cells into the unit, a couple of inner loops. And also I'm going to put a couple of these older inner loops that I've had for a while, and these are the sort of glittery style inner loops. Now, how does the battery charger know that I'm using nickel metal hydride? Well, it doesn't yet. You can see that it thinks they're nickel metal hydride, so it's flashing the nickel metal hydride icon, and what it's doing is it's putting in a 120 milliamp charge current, and it will now charge for 10 minutes. And if none of these voltages, well, if any of these voltages rises above a higher threshold, it's probably maybe 1.8 or 2 volts, then of course it will see it as a lithium. If all these voltages stay down at this low level for the full 10 minutes, then the battery charger knows that these are nickel metal hydride, and it will increase this current from 120 milliamps to 500 milliamps. Nickel metal hydrides on this charger charge at a maximum of 500 milliamps. And that's irrespective of the current setting. You can see that the currents are still set to 3 amps. Well, it won't charge nickel metal hydride at 3 amps. Half an amp is the maximum. Okay, while it's determining whether these are genuinely nickel metal hydride, which as I say takes about 10 minutes, I'll show you what else was supplied in the box with this unit. This power adapter, which has a UK style converter attached to it. This one is output of 5 volts 3 amps, 8 volt 9 volts, sorry, 3 amps, 12 volt 3 amps, 15 volt 3 amps, or 20 volt 2.25 amps. You can see those there now. Maximum 45 watts, but this unit appears to take a maximum, or request a maximum, of 15 volts, and so this adapter would be 15 volts at up to 3 amps. Also supplied is this USB Type-C to Type-C cable. And now you can see that the timers, I'll just brighten the displays, are starting to elapse. It's raised the current from 120 milliamps, and you can see it's moving outwards because that's the order that I put the cells in. Raising the current from 120 milliamps to 500 milliamps. The voltages of the cells have remained in the region of nickel metal hydride, so it knows that they're not lithium ion, and they are nickel metal hydride, and so it will charge them at 500 milliamps. This one is full. Now, how good is this charger at charging nickel metal hydride? Well, most of the newer cells that I have, it seems to charge them fully all the way up to about 1.5 volts or above. Some of the older Eneloops, like these glittery ones, it does seem to stop a little bit short of 1.5 volts. Now, whether that's based on internal resistance, I don't know. Let's have a look at internal resistance. Well, that one says 41 milliohms, so that's quite low. They're all sort of in that region. Let's take a look at internal resistance on these cells. Well, that one's 101. That might just be the slider. If you have a little bit of, I don't know, contamination or dirt on these sliders or on the ends of the cells, it can upset the internal resistance measurement. So it's worth just wiping the slider contacts. But yeah, so mostly it's good. Some of the older cells, it seems to charge them to a slightly lower voltage. Now, I don't know whether that's intentional or whether that's just because it misses the delta V top. Now, the other thing, of course, is what does it do with cells that are at 0 volts or even slightly negative? Well, I've got some cells like that. So I've got this PIR switchable light. It's called a Light Angel, I think. It's far too bright for its own good. This cob runs the cells down, and this has been flat for a while. So I'll just take the cells out of here. What's in here? Okay, they're ladder 1900s, and we'll see how it copes. One of these cells will be at 0 or possibly slightly negative. We'll see how it copes with these. Okay, let's put these cells in the charger and see what they do. This one's saying error. Now that's either because it's at 0, so is that one, or possibly slightly reverse voltage. But how easy is it to get these to charge? Let's just pull the sliders down and see whether they'll start to charge. Because when it's testing the cells, it is putting a small amount of charge into them. This one is at just over 1 volt. Okay, let's try these again. That second one has started charging now. Oh, I think they all have. So in fact, and you can see that the voltage is quite low but rising up quite quickly. This makes a very good job of lifting cells which are at 0 volts or even slightly negative voltage up into a chargeable range so that the charger can start charging them. Yeah, it's very good at doing that. Now, once again, because these are nickel metal hydride, it will start off saying, well, they might be nickel metal hydride, or they might just be deeply discharged lithium cells. And it does this same thing with those discharged lithium cells. It charges them at 120 milliamps, waits for the voltage to rise up into the range of lithium, and then we'll switch these indicators to lithium ion. But if the cell voltages don't rise up above the range for nickel metal hydride, then after 10 minutes it will assume they're nickel metal hydride and switch to a 500 milliamp charge current. And it looks like the 10 minutes is up for the IKEA ladder cells. This one has switched up to 500 milliamps. The other ones haven't yet. Which order did I put them in? Yeah, I think I put that one in first. But yeah, there we are. They've done their 10 minutes at 120 milliamps. The charger will now increase the current to 500 milliamps, and the ladder cells will then continue to charge. So a quick look at the underside of the unit. It's got 9 of these rubber feet, and because of a slight bow in the case, it was kind of sitting high on this center foot. So I just had to trim that off with a knife, and now it sits nice and flat on the remaining 8 feet. So the Xtar VC8S, it is a very versatile charger. It can do 2 lithium ion cells at up to 3 amps. You can do 4 lithium ion cells at up to 2 amps. Okay, this one's running at 1 amp. and that's because of this internal resistance based selection of current. Now I think this table is right. I latterly changed this threshold from 3 amps to 2 amps at 30 milliohms. This 80 milliohms might be 90 milliohms. I'm not entirely sure because I'm not 100% sure of these numbers, but these are the approximate thresholds. Let's take a look at the internal resistance of this cell actually. So that one measured 72, that puts it in the 1 amp range. This one measured 56 milliohms, and that puts it in the 2 amp range. And indeed it is charging at 2 amps, and this one is charging at 1 amp. It can charge 8 lithium ion cells at up to 1 amp for each cell. It can even charge lithium iron phosphate cells, but you do have to make sure it's in store mode for that. Otherwise it'll charge them up to 4.2 volts and probably damage them. It can mostly charge sodium ion batteries, but you do have to have it in the store mode. Now interestingly, it's charging that one, it's discharging that one because it's a bit high. It's charging this one, but this one, because it's at such a low voltage, 1.87, it currently still thinks it's a nickel metal hydride, but that will rise up. That, I presume, is at 120 milliamps. Yes, it is at 120 milliamps. But once that rises up into the region of a lithium cell, then it will determine that it's not nickel metal hydride and switch to lithium ion. And it looks like the voltage at which it decides that it's a lithium ion and not a nickel metal hydride is 2 volts, although I missed the precise changeover, but it's now at 2.06 volts and it's charging still at 120 milliamps. So now it's treating it as a lithium ion that's been over discharged, so it's lifting it up gently, and at some voltage, and I've got a feeling it might be something like 2.8 volts, it will then raise up the current to a current based on the internal resistance, which it hasn't done a measurement of yet. Perhaps it does that once it gets the voltage up. And then nickel metal hydride cells, it seems pretty good at lifting 0 volt cells up from 0 volts. It will initially show error, but the ones that are at 0 volts, you may have to just pull the sliders a few times to get them charging. And in terms of finding the top, you can see that this older inner loop has topped out at 1.47. So has this brand new Xtar. Actually, that's now saying full, although this one is pushing up to 1.49. This older inner loop does seem a bit stuck at 1.34, and the ladders have got a bit further to go. Interestingly, for nickel metal hydride, it does say that the charge cutoff voltage is 1.45 plus or minus 0.1. So that's 1.35 to 1.55 volts. So all of this is within spec for the machine. And of course, don't forget this almost throwaway line here. In store mode, VC8S can be used to charge lithium iron phosphate batteries, and also it can mostly charge sodium ion. Cheerio.